if you are in the chat, go ahead and say hello. I see that there's some people from Orlando, Florida, from Minnesota, from Santa Clara, Utah. I have not been there before. From Ohio, glad to have you all here. I'm Devon Noel Lee, and I really love helping people write their family histories. I have two YouTube channels, although they've been a little bit in hiatus. For a little bit, but one of them will be coming back soon, and that is the Write Your Family History channel, where I teach you how to write your family history. And then there is the main channel, Family History Fanatics. Howdy, Andrew from Newton, Iowa. It's not too chilly there. I lived in Cedar Rapids, Iowa for a little bit, for about 6 to 7 years. So I miss Iowa. It was great. All right. Thank you guys also for joining in. I hope you're going to enjoy this session. And feel free to put your questions in any time. I will be monitoring the chat and be looking for any comments you have. You can also react. If you find something that's really funny, or if you find something moving, then I want you to let me know. Howdy to all of you. Let's get started. So my philosophy is that you could rapidly write the stories of your ancestors, record by record, sentence by sentence. And some of you in the chat, let me know, how many of you don't know what to write, or don't know where to start, or feel like you have these other blocks in your way when you're thinking about writing about your ancestor. I know that writer's block can be a challenge, but I hope by the end of this session, you will never experience writer's block again. So how do we get over writer's block? Well, the first thing you do to get over writer's block is you've got to write something, anything. You need to get something onto the screen that you're writing on, or you can go old school and have a notepad and a pen. I will also advise those who do the old school handwriting, get some highlighters, some really colorful highlighters or colorful pens, because you're going to be needing that in the process of writing here. But you're going to write something. And to do that, all you have to do is find the records you have about your ancestors. That's it. Many people will have the belief that, oh my gosh, I don't know where to start. Well, you always start with a record, any type of genealogy record. It can be a obituary, a death certificate, a letter. It can be anything that you have after you've researched your ancestors. I noticed right here, there was a comment from Marcia. She says she doesn't know where to write because she has too much information. Linda says she doesn't know where to start. Do I focus on a particular person in her family? Joan has too much information. You don't know how to decide what to choose. Dagny from New York has started multiple times. It's just that he had a complicated life, and I keep wondering where to start. That I am so glad you guys are all here. You're going to start with one record, any record you have about an ancestor, and record by record, sentence by sentence, you will start writing the stories of your ancestors. It doesn't matter how many times you've started or stopped or given up. You will be able to rapidly write about your ancestors. I believe in focusing on one person and all the family that's connected to them. And so that's the approach I'm going to take. So we actually will have a viewer. Her name is Linda, and she is from Ohio. And she used the form that was in the description for this video to share with me her ancestor, Margaret Lally, who was born in Ireland and died in Cleveland, Ohio. Now, if you think this session is really, really fun, you can fill out that description box. If you click on the description and scroll down to more, you're going to see, do you want Aunt Devon Noel Lee to transform your ancestor stories live at RootsTech? Fill out the form. Well, I might be invited back onto Family Search and RootsTech throughout the year, but definitely on my writing channel, I will be, let me share this screen here so you can see everybody's doing the chat. But down here at the bottom, fill out this form. If you fill out that form and follow the instructions, then on my writing channel, we'll do some follow-up throughout the year. So if you really like this session, then we'll be able to go through it again with possibly one of your documents. So you need to start with somebody that you have researched. You can't start with somebody you thought, oh, I have this really great ancestor that I just discovered 2 minutes ago. I'm going to write about them. No, you actually either have to have researched the ancestor, or you have to have reproved the research someone else has done. If you will do that, then you will have a lot of success in writing. So you can see that Linda has attached a number of sources to her ancestor, Margaret Lally, and we can choose any one of those documents in order to start writing her story. Well, Linda shared an obituary, or at least a death notice. You can start with any quality genealogy research record. And what do I mean by quality genealogy research record? Well, what I mean by that is that you want to use something that's not a derivative or the derivative of a derivative of a derivative. You know what I mean? You want to go to the original record, the primary source, however you want to use that terminology, and you want to get to that record. So birth certificates, death certificates, church records, land records, probate, all of those original records, even though semantically it might be a copy that the clerk copied into the main will book. Don't worry about that. Get to the will that's in the book that reads it. Don't just get an abstract or an extract or a secondhand copy. And so in this case, we're looking at the newspaper clipping, and that's where we're going to start. So lots of people have said, what software do I use? Well, hold on a second, and I promise to answer that question, but that's a great question to have dropped in the chat. If I fail to tell you what program to use, just remind me. All right, so we're going to start with this record, and what's the next step that we do? Well, the next step that we do, let me get my screen back on here, is we transcribe the document. Now in your hand, I talk about 4 different types of transcription: extraction, transcriptions, transliterations, and translations. Those last 2 deal with converting foreign language to the language that you're going to write in, and the other 2 deal with some different ways that people take content from this source and put it into a usable writing format. You need to transcribe only what you see. I fully believe that when you research, you become a better researcher when you write. And when you write, it's a circle. So you become a better researcher by writing, and you write to become a better researcher. If I said that out of circle, just imagine research on one side, writer on the other side. And when you connect them both in a circle, a loop of one towards the other, you wind up improving both skills simultaneously. But in this step, if you haven't done it already, I want you to try transcribe only what you see. So if a name is misspelled, let's say you had Patton and it's supposed to be with an EN in the obituary, but they have an ON, you are going to only put the ON, and then later you're going to bring in other sources to make the corrections that you need. Transcribe only what you see. Don't change any details. The other thing you want to do after you get your transcription, your transliteration, or your translation, depending on what you have, save that into your Family Search family tree, into your Roots Magic Legacy Tree Maker. What's the other one that Family Tree Maker. Save that into the notes associated with the source so you always have a copy of that transcription. And then once you have the transcription of only what you saw, that Linda did a very good job of this, you are going to put this in your writing program. So here's the software you use. Anything that you're comfortable with. You do not need a fancy writing software program. No, not at all. You don't need it. I use Google Docs just because I never know what computer I'm going to be on. I have a desktop, a laptop. Sometimes I have a computer at the Family History Center where I volunteer. I never know what computer I'm going to be on, and it's easy for me to just do it on Google Docs. But you can do Apple Pages, you can do Microsoft Word, and as I mentioned earlier, you can go old school and do a handwriting. I would recommend not doing typewriters just because I don't know. That was a skill I learned typing on, and I just can't see the benefit of doing a typewriter. But if you love typewriters, then you can also use that as well. So that answers the question of what program you need. Anything you're comfortable with. You do not need any fancy software. So now that you have the transcription, the next thing you're going to do is you're going to stop and cite your source if you haven't already. Now, you want to get the source of citation in a format that you choose. Site Builder, it was at RootsTech last year as a sponsor. It's a really great website to show you a lot of different source citation styles. Choose one and be consistent. And then what you need to do is make sure that your citation, you're going to copy this and then put it into your document. Somewhere in your document so that you know that's what you started with. In this case, Linda's going to have to go and look at the website or the library in which she found this article, but from the information she gave to me, in the information she gave to me, this is as far as able to get with that citation. And then is there a good resource for learning how to cite sources properly? Joe, I answered that. Go to Site Builder. They have some free resources, and then they have a premium website, and that allows you to put in some simple information and quickly switch it between Strathclyde, I may have said that wrong, I'm sorry, Evidence Explained, and a number of different source citation variations that are common in genealogy research. So that's what I just use a builder, that way you don't have to learn about it. You can also use the template forms that are in genealogy software, Roots Magic, Legacy, Family Tree Maker. They all have really great templates, so we just plug stuff in and they generate it. So now that you have your transcription and you've cited your sources, it's decision time. And the one thing I've noticed at RootsTech this year is there's a lot of talk about AI and assistance. And so it's a decision time. You can leverage AI at this moment, or you can do it yourself. So there is a sponsor called Storied. If you haven't checked them out last year or this year, you really do need to check them out. They're a fun tool. And they have a feature called Story Assist. And you can see on screen, you can have various different tones. You can have the story be about yourself or someone else. You don't necessarily have to give a title, but here I just said Margaret Lally Patton died. That was the title of the obituary, just made it easier. The key to Storied is it's going to be about no more than 5 or 6 bullet points. So you're going to go back to your transcription. We'll go back for just a moment. You're going to pull out 5 or 6 key points from this story, and then you're going to plug it into Story Assist. There will be a button that says Generate Story, and they generate a story. Margaret Lally Patton was a beloved mother, wife, and member of the Cleveland community. She passed away. And what this does is add some extra things that you didn't put into the program. Built a life filled with love and happiness. 1 daughter, 3 sons, 1 daughter who were heartbroken by the loss of their matriarch. Now you've got to be careful. What if they weren't heartbroken? Maybe they weren't even alive yet. What other things? Maybe they didn't like her. Maybe she was just, maybe she was a relative that people that abandoned her kids and they didn't like her very much. So you have to be careful. I really like this tool because it helps you see possibilities of writing in this narrative style. But it's up to you to ensure that what the computer generates is accurate to the story in which you have. And when you don't know, don't add it. Okay? The next thing you may have heard about ChatGPT, and I just watched a really great session that's pre-recorded. And I wish I took time to make a note of it, but it is about ChatGPT. It is part of RootsTech this year, and it told you a lot of ways to write command prompts in order to get a story or various other processes done for your genealogy research. I highly recommend you look it out. If somebody can figure out which one it was, I know that Angie Bush was involved, but she wasn't the main speaker. The guy was just fantastic. Anyway, so you give a prompt. Now, in your handout, I've given you a starting prompt where it said you're a family historian sharing a story about, I forgot to put about an ancestor for a reader casually interested in their heritage. And then all you have to do, unlike Story Assist, you can just copy what you transcribed and dump it after details from, in this case, a death, are the following, and you just paste it in, and then ChatGPT will reconfigure what you shared. It will add some extra details. The icy fingers of winter had tightened their grip. Well, there is a problem. I don't know how icy it was in December 1903 in Cleveland, Ohio. Maybe it was unusually warm, so you might have to do a little extra research to find out if this is true or not. But you can see this type of story writing style, check it for accuracy, and then apply it into your writing system. I definitely use these two, the ChatGPT and the Story Assist, when I'm stuck and I feel like I'm writing the same way over and over and over again, and I want to get a fresh take and a fresh spin on how to reconfigure items. But the way that I typically do things is that I go ahead and do it myself. So I'm going to show you the next step because Linda's obituary didn't need this step. But some of the times when you do a transcription, it'll just say place. And then it says, in this case, University Hospital, Columbus, Ohio, name, this guy's name, resident. And so what you need to do is what I like to call create paragraphs. So now we are going to turn the details and put it into a sentence. We had the record, we're creating the sentences, and as we build those sentences, it builds paragraphs, and it looks something like this. Henry died the 27th of March, 1931 in this location. He resided at, his widow was. So I'm turning everything into a sentence. And if you notice that this isn't really fancy. So everybody and their dog can do this. And I did saw a comment that just went by, and that Family Search will do some of these sentencifying steps on the timeline. Ancestry does this on the timeline. A lot of tools will sentencify your facts. But the thing is, they don't always sentencify all of the things that are on a document. For instance, who the physician was for Henry, right? And so you have to take that extra step. We're going to go back to Margaret. Now, Margaret, everything is already in sentences. So the next thing I'm going to recommend is whatever source you have, put the facts in chronological order. Your final production or your final result of your story typically won't be in chronological order, but to ensure that you get all of the connections that are going to happen in the story writing process, I highly recommend that you move things into chronological order. So in this case, Margaret Lally came from Ireland. That's going to lead. And then it talks about her dying, it talks about her survivors, and it talks about the burial process. So this was just a quick little chronological shift around. And then I can start adding details to it. Now, my favorite part starts here. This is where the magic happens. And this is what you have to do, whether you're using the AI tools or you're doing it yourself. So you're going to start at, for every detail that is in your extraction that you've turned into paragraphs, you're going to ask who, what, when, where, why, how, all of those questions. How are they related? And you're also going to reprove every fact that you have pulled out. So let's say in that, we'll go back to that Patton. We're going to reprove the spelling of the surname Patton. We're going to validate when Margaret came to the United States from Ireland. We're going to verify every fact. This is when the writing improves your research skill, because you're going to go grab all your sources that prove all of the facts in this one source and give it more strength, and of course put the citation along with it. Some other things I'm going to invite you to do as you mark up your writing is to do the math. Don't just put that she's the daughter of the two parents. How old were the parents were when she was born? Or in this case, if we were writing a birth story, how long have they been deceased? What, how, if she's in birth order, put her in birth order, but to tell me the ages, if we were writing a birth story, the ages of her older sibling and how long until the next sibling. All of these details will help you tell a better story. Now, there's an example over on Write Your Family History of when somebody was living at one place, but at the time of her death, but she resided somewhere else. And then she went to church at one place, but the funeral was in another, and she's buried in another. And I would recommend you map those things out and demonstrate distances. The other thing you want to do with a map is you want to understand the geography. How close are they to the coast? How inland are they? Also elevation. Having moved to Los Alamos, New Mexico, we're at 7,500 feet above sea level. And that's an important detail because a lot of us have altitude sickness when we first move here, or if we go off the mesas for a week and we come back and then we have altitude sickness again. So map things out, figure out the topography going on. I'm also going to ask you to add family context. So in the case of Margaret, she died, right? Well, who was alive at the time of the death? The obituary highlights a few things, but it didn't talk about siblings. It didn't talk about parents. If she had a really close relationship with a niece or a nephew, that person isn't contained. But not only just the names of who did they join in death and who is left to mourn, how old were they, right? How old were they? How long ago since that person passed away? And of course, at some point, you'll add historical context. Now, I wasn't able to go into that for this presentation, but there's other presentations, including one last year about doing the research to getting historical context in order to improve your stories. That is something you can re-watch at RootsTech, and I highly recommend, but you can then insert it back into your stories. So I'm going to come over here to show you how the markup fun begins. If the moderator is there and has seen any questions that you think should slip in right now, feel free to let me know. Let's see. The handout should be on the underneath the description page where you see the video. And then, okay, so this is a really great question Lori had. What about ethical considerations of putting your name as an author on a story and using the AI tools to generate your content? That is a fantastic question. And here is my recommendation. I don't want you to copy paste your transcription into the AI tool and then copy and paste that and say, here's my story. Okay, once you revalidate, because you're going to go revalidate it, you're going to mark things up, and you're going to add source citations. The AI is just there to help you reconfigure things a little bit and get your writing juices flowing. It's not there to do the work for you. And in that case, do you tell people that you used Grammarly or some other grammar checker to check your periods and commas and your noun verb agreement? No, you don't. So as long as you do that, I don't think you necessarily need to say, hey, I used AI to write this story, because you only leveraged it to get the blood flowing and organize things, but then you have to do the work to validate everything, to move things around, to add more context that the AI just can't do. And so then in that case, I wouldn't necessarily highlight that feature. There was another question. What if it's a recent relative like a grandfather, more than one source? You will always, always, always have tons of sources when you finish this process, but you have to start with one. Otherwise, you're being disorganized, and you're going to start and stop, and you're going to feel overwhelmed. You start with one, and then you bring in other sources as you need to make the story better. So in this case, if this obituary is connected to somebody's interview or recollection of the funeral ceremony, you can bring that in and then cite that source. So I hope that answers your question from Sherry Thompson. All right, so let's go back to this sharing the screen. And we're going to talk about marking up the document, okay? So we're going to start with this first paragraph because I think it's the best one to show you. But you can already see all of these little highlights are different comments that I have made for myself on different facts that I want to ask questions, expand, double check, and so forth. So we have Margaret Lally. Now, in the obituary, it said her name was Margaret Lally. I'm going to do a couple of things anytime I see a name. One, confirm spelling. And I hope you can see on the side, I'm doing this commenting feature. And then the other thing I'm going to do is have a pronunciation guide, okay? If you have a lot of foreign languages, foreign names, and let's say you're using a lot of Swedish names, but you're writing in English, and they have all of these really cool, like the umlauts and the other different, the O's with the slashes through it, all those decorative variations with their vowels and so forth. You will want to put a pronunciation guide if you have a lot of names, then put that as a document that goes with your story. Keep it separate. But sometimes you'll want to add here. So Lally rhymes with Sally. Then you think, oh gosh, why you put it there? It's going to make it sound really bad. Remember, we're writing a rough draft. This is not the fantastic version. But at some point, we're either going to put Lally rhymes with Sally in the story, or in this case, I love footnotes for commentary, okay? Explanations. And you can also have source citations, of course, but when you have a name, never assume somebody knows how to pronounce a name like Lally. Margaret, I feel like Margaret is a name many people are going to know, so I'm not going to necessarily worry about this. The next thing, came to this country. Okay. Now, we never want to assume anything, even though this obituary is published in Cleveland. What if it was copy and pasted and from a telegraph wire? We never want to assume that it's this country. And then we also have a stylistic decision we have to make. Is it USA? Is it America? Do they mean Ohio? What do you really mean? That's a choice to be made. The next is 52 years ago. Okay, I see 52 years ago. So I'm 1903 when the obituary was published. You notice I'm doing the math. I'm doing 52 years ago, and that becomes 1851, right? Maybe. I don't know because I don't have specific dates. So then I'm going to want to put a source. What's my source? Okay. Now, if you're doing this old school handwriting way, this is when you're going to want to get out your colored highlighters. Use different colored highlighters for stylistic things like this America, Ohio versus USA. Which style do you want to use? If you need a source, highlight it one color. If you're trying to do the math, You can just write it up, but use different colors for the different techniques you're going through. Where did I put the chat? All right. I'm gonna move this back over here for a moment. Sorry, I've been doing something behind the screen. Now, granted, we said that she came over 52 years ago, but how old was she when she migrated? That's another question. Don't leave that up for your reader to figure out. You tell people. Next, it says parents. So what question would you ask? Well, first, what are their names? But I hope you'll think about, okay, but what are their ages, occupation, and reasons for moving? There is some debate of whether it was triggered by the Irish potato famine, or was it because they were running from the law? Was it because they were a second son and he wasn't going to inherit anything, and America was a land of opportunity? Additionally, the family came directly to this city. Okay, again, we don't want to assume. So what city? Are we assuming that it's Cleveland? And if so, why? And if it's a migration story, another thing I like to do is, where else could somebody have gone? Where else someone could have gone? And why the place they went? Okay. You can also, now remember I said map it out. So she's moving from Ireland to Cleveland. So then we want to map it out and talk about the distance between Ireland and Cleveland. You know, how would they have traveled? Do you start to see that just one little thing, that's one little sentence, or one little fact can turn into a series of questions. And when you add those questions to your story, that's how you make it non-boring, because if you just have a whole list of dry facts, nobody cares. But if you talk about how it took her, or may have, because in this case, I talked to Linda and she said she doesn't have a passenger manifest. Okay, so how long could it have taken someone to travel from Ireland to Cleveland, Ohio? What is the most likely route they would have taken in 1851? Would they have gone up the Huron River in New York, and then over the canal, and then come down Lake Erie and hop into Cleveland? Did they land in Maryland, get on the Baltimore and Ohio Railroad, and then get to Columbus, Ohio, and then go up? Like, what would have the likely routes have been, and how long do you think it would have taken? Another thing, it was then a struggling village with a few hundred inhabitants. Okay, a few hundred, are you sure? I'm going to say, what was the population about the time that the family arrived? Not only what was that, what was the makeup? Were they German? Were they Irish? Were they Dutch Irish? Not Dutch Irish. The Germans that went to Pennsylvania, they have a name. I forget what it is. Forgive me, but you get the idea. Like, what kind of group of people were they? You can also include the religious practices. So, for instance, if Cleveland, it has a large group of Catholics, regardless of whether Irish or German or English Catholics, then that would be attractive to somebody who is Catholic. And so you might want to talk about that. Oh, this is a place where Catholics lived. I saw some people that were in Utah. Perhaps you have people going to a location that is traveling to be with other members of the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints. If you have Jewish, you would do, where were the synagogues? Most Jewish people want to be where there is a rabbi in a synagogue. So include that. Don't just have a number, but start adding the context. So you will be getting historical context by adding these details. But when somebody says a few hundred inhabitants, is it 100 or 200, or is 900, 800? Start. Thank you so much. Somebody just said Pennsylvania Dutch. I had it in the wrong order. I was going to say Dutch, Pennsylvania. So thank you so much for correcting me. But whenever you see a statement, go and get the facts behind it. And then, of course, get your source citation. So you're going to see that I have marked this up for a number of different things. Yesterday, okay, I need a date and a day, because when things happen on Saturday versus a Tuesday, they have different sentiments. So I would definitely recommend that you put in the day of the week. Anytime something happens, try to put in the day of the week. It really makes a difference. Age 60, how far or close with her death to her next birthday? That really makes a difference. Is it she was 1 day shy of turning 60? Was it 3 weeks after her birthday? These are little details that get overlooked when people are talking about writing their stories, but they make a big impact. All right, moving on. Now, when you, I've got a couple little questions. All right. Let me take a moment to talk about questions, and then I'm going to also handle the next part I want to warn you about. Okay, if you used a transcription and don't change it at all, does that risk plagiarism? If you've noticed already that you take the transcription and you jump it out and I'm already marking it up, I'm inviting you to change. If you find maybe somebody's personal accounts of the funeral for Margaret, then make sure you demonstrate whether it's an indirect or a direct quote and cite that source. Now you've avoided plagiarism. So in my strategy of writing, because we're going to mark these up, we're going to ask questions, we're going to add details, you're going to avoid plagiarism because you're already transforming what the original source was. So hopefully, Barbara, that answers your question. Dagny, would you maybe start a story from the end of a person's life and then go back to the beginning of their life? Start in the middle or go to the beginning and to the end? So this is actually a question to answer once you've completed your first draft. So when you're choosing a document to start with, and remember I told you to arrange things chronologically, eventually you're going to build somebody's life story out using all the documents you've processed. And then what you're going to do is figure out what's the most interesting part of their story and then rearrange things. But you're not going to know what's the most interesting part of their story until you've processed the research you've gathered. You may have it tinkling in the back of your mind, and you can highlight it, use various colors, digital colors, or if you're using a highlighter circle, I think this is where I want to start and put a question mark. And so in your case, my great-grandfather disappeared in 1885. Should I start there? Probably. But I can't answer that question until you have processed all the documents. And if you still find his disappear in 1885 as the most interesting part, then start there. And those are stylistic decisions after you've completed your rough draft. So thank you, Thomas. You said, what was the population of Cleveland in 1900? It was 3,800, no, 380,000. We're going to round that, and it dropped. But remember, this was going to be 52 years before 1903. But I like what you're doing here because you can bring that in at the end and talk about the growth of Cleveland through her lifetime. That is a fantastic piece of data that you can put into this story. So good job, but I don't know what the population was at this time. I'd have to come back to my other notes. All right, so once you've marked up your story, then you go research, and then you go get your other documents, your city directories, love city directories, census records, and put this into the story. She died in 1903 in the United States, so that would be a 1900 census. What was she doing? Who was she living with? And who was she living nearby, right? You can go and grab that and add it to the story. So again, I kind of mentioned this patent thing. Go find the other records and make a determination on how the surname should be spelt in the story. And then you can put a footnote if there is some discrepancy and say, while these sources say the name is spelled Patton. I'm going to use Patten. Here's my reason why. But put it in a footnote away from the story so that if somebody cares to read it, they can. But if they don't, it doesn't break up your story unless there's like a name change during the middle of their life. For instance, my grandmother was born Marie Anderson, but she was adopted 1 week after she was born, and her name became Louise Long. So I could start her story or at some point say, she was born Marie Anderson, she's now Louise Long. And then because I said she's now known as Louise Long, for the rest of the story, I'm always going to call her Louise, and I don't have to have a footnote. So depending on the name, situation, or the facts that you need to incorporate, you may go and do an in the text explanation of names or leverage the footnotes. Okay, let's go back to the screen share. Oh, but the one thing I needed to emphasize is while you are marking up the source that you started with, do not stop and go research until you have finished marking up that draft. And then you go research, and then you bring in the sources and you bring in the citation, add everything back to the story, stop and mark up again. So let me show you how I marked up again with Margaret's story. Okay. Lots of great comments for you guys. I really appreciate that. We have about 15 minutes left, so let me just highlight a couple of these points, and then we'll leave it a free-for-all for questions. All right, so when I went through this story and adding details, she died on Christmas morning. So you can have a stylistic change, whether you're going to say the 25th of December or say Christmas morning. I said she was 1 month shy of her 67th birthday, but there's a problem because she has a baptismal record that puts her birth 67 years before her death in 1903. Yet the obituary said that she was 60 years old. This is a conflict. You're going to run into conflicts. So how do you resolve them? Well, you have done the research and you have come to a conclusion. So write it into your story. And then if you need to make an explanation, notice the obituary says she was 60, calculating from her baptismal record, she was 66, and she was 1 month shy of 67. And here I have the URL for the source citation. One other little hack I'm going to share with you is not all of us have all the perfect citations in our at the ready when we're starting to write. And so what I want you to do anytime you have a source, I don't necessarily want you to stop and format the citation while you're writing because it uses a different side of your brain. So you can simply make note, where is the source citation? What is it? And then after you're processing the data again, when you've turned off the creative writing side of things or the fact analysis side of the thing, then you do the meticulous source citation, put it in Site Builder, put it in Roots Magic, or you use Evidence Explain book and write your citations right there. So this actually, you may think, hey, she hasn't cited her sources. That's because this is a work in progress document, and I can go back later and correct my citations. There was another thing in this document, this 21 Division Street. Remember I said map it out? Well, in a modern map, this no longer exists. So I have a lot of questions. And once you're revising things again and again, you're going to have a lot of different questions, and then you go back and figure it out. But the Division Street that is there is just south of Lake Erie. And so when I saw that, I was like, oh, is this the same general location? Not only that, when I looked on a modern map, there were a couple other details that when I spoke to Linda about, she was telling me, yes, this is probably, even though the place has been torn down, this was a place for a lot of people. And she even said specifically from 2 counties in Ireland, they came and congregated to. She knew that it was a poor part of town. There were some saloons, and there's even a family legend that maybe Margaret's dad not her dad, her husband, he was a saloon owner. Can you include legend? Absolutely. You just have to say where they came from. The family believes that he owned a saloon. It was a part of town, but you're not sure. Now, in the draft phase, go ahead and use awkward language. And then later you can come back and improve it and make it flow better. Or there's another stylistic tip is you could have what's called box text. So let me just pretend for a moment. I'm going to actually use this little drawing tool. In your document, maybe what you're going to do is you're going to insert a block. Google Docs is not really good for formatting. When you're ready to format, I would highly recommend you use a different program. But let's just pretend this is a solid colored block, okay? And in this block, what you could do is you could talk about the family legend about the saloon, right? And so it's not part of the main story, but adding this little side commentary, instead of just throwing it down in a footnote, you make it a little bit more visually interesting and some extra details that go into your story to make it a wonderful story that does bring in historical context, family legends in there. So if you don't feel comfortable putting it into the family legend here, you can, where appropriate, make a box, give it a different color, and put the text here and say, hey, there's a family legend. So that's one way to handle that. All right. Let's see. Now, unfortunately, because of the length of time that I'm allotted here at RootsTech, I don't have enough time to go through every what am I going to say? Everything that I noticed in Margaret's story, but Margaret gets to benefit, not Margaret, Linda, this is her ancestor, Margaret. We had a conversation yesterday, and I marked up her text. She's going to get a final copy of the story I put together. And then she'll get all the markups and then she can go do the final work. One other thing I did want to share is that another time to use ChatGPT, or there's even, I'm going to show you here for a moment. Let me get out of this part. When you're done writing, one of the tools that you can use is there's a tool called Grammarly, and it's a Grammarly rewrite. You can highlight your text. What do you want to do? Here are some ideas. It says improve it. If you give it a moment, it will tell you some ways to rewrite the story. You can insert it. You can ask it to retry. You can change the tone, and you can leverage these tools to improve your writing or learn how to write better. That's one tool. The other thing you could do is, again, use this similar prompt. Hey, you're a family historian. Using storytelling technique, take what I have and reconfigure it. So I just took all that dry, boring, do-it-myself context, threw it through ChatGPT, and it says, the snow had begun to fall lightly on the rooftops of Decision Street as the world outside Margaret Lally's Patton's window turned a quiet shade of winter gray. It was Christmas morning. You see how it adds this more creative narrative voice. And you can decide to play with it and mark that up. Okay, so that is all of the presentation part. I'm going to go through the moderator. They've added some more questions, and I'm going to take them. Okay, so W.D. Wolf said, what about letters or photographs to include in the story? I have a letter from World War I where my uncle told my grandfather, his brother, that he was a male vampire. Oh my gosh, my husband has a vampire. If you haven't heard the story of of Benjamin Joseph Garnett, or James Garnett. I'm sorry. I had the Joseph. He has a James. He was a vampire. Anyway, so letters and photographs, they beautify your stories. I would highly recommend you insert them. You can take little snippets of the stories and insert them into your life story that you have. And then you have the picture of the letter right there to complement and add visual interest to your story. And then if you want a full transcription of the letter, you can use the back content content area of your book when you finally publish your book and have a full transcription of the letter there. And then you just say, hey, check out the full transcription in the back, particularly if it's ugly handwriting. It talks about being a male vampire. Man, that's awesome. And again, remember I told you about these box text. So you're writing your story and then you can do a box text and analyze it. You know, is he right? Is he wrong? Why we would have said something like that. So there's a lot of different strategies to incorporate letters, stories, and family legends. If you use, we did that one. Did that one. How do I cite original documents that I've inherited? That's a question for a source citation person. Lisa Stokes talks about source citations in many of her presentations at RootsTech. You can also get evidence explained, look it up, or check Site Builder, and that will help you out. Do you happen to know if this Site Builder has updated? I don't know if Site Builder has updated to the newest version of Evidence Explained. However, they try to stay on top of it. If you follow up with them, they'll be able to tell you. How do you find out about the policy of diversion to Galveston? I don't know what diversion to Galveston is, so I would simply start doing a Google search to find what that term means. One best source to start with using this process? That is a very good question. On my Write Your Family History channel, I've done a number of these challenges, and often starting with the obituary, many of the viewers are like, why are you starting with an obituary, end with an obituary? Honestly, I really do like to start writing in chronological order: birth, marriage, death, and then fill in the gap. But it's up to you, because remember I talked about writer's block. As long as you have a document, you never have writer's block. But sometimes you don't want to process that document. So if you are writing in chronological order, meaning your draft has the birth related stuff, the childhood, the teen, you see what I'm saying? It's in chronological order, but you grab, hey, I really want to work with this diary and I want to insert it. You can draft in whatever order you want, processing the documents however you want, as long as your text flows in chronological order. And once you've processed that draft, then and process all the content that you need to have, then you can start asking, how do I make this, what's the most important part to hook? Margaret told me that, not Margaret, Linda told me that Margaret died a month after one brother and 9 days before the last brother. So all of her siblings had died, and these three died within, 60 days of each other. So that's interesting. I kind of would lead off with that. That's kind of fun. But it set off a court battle by their descendants fighting over property, this, that, and the other way. Okay, so now that's a really intriguing hook. So then when I revise everything, then I would lead with that, tell the story, and then I can continue from there. What do I think of using a narrative report on individual from Roots Magic to build the story? Correct me if I'm wrong, Linda, I know you're a viewer of mine. I think I already talked about starting with a Roots Magic narrative report. It organizes your facts in a somewhat chronological way, so it's a great starting point, but I wouldn't stop there. Additionally, in the ChatGPT video, again, I can't remember who it was from, but it was this year, and the gentleman talked about, he took a narrative report, ran it through ChatGPT with a prompt to clean it up and made the story more interesting, and then I would take that and do the process I talked about. How do you craft an introduction that will pull people into your story? Again, Ramona, that's going to happen after you've finished processing all of your documents. You are going to write the story. What's the most interesting thing? For me, for my Civil War ancestor, William James Townsend, he was blinded because he got sick while he was serving in Company K 133rd. And it was the surgeon who was trying to relieve pain, but it left him blinded. And so I would actually start there, right? I could use ChatGPT or some of these other tools to help me format a really good hook. But that to me, that's what I remember about him. And then he went on to have nine or 10 kids. So I definitely want to start there. And then I want to talk, go back to his birth, take you to the story, take him into the Civil War, and then finish off his story and circle back to some kind of conclusion that ties back to he did live a full life after he was blinded during the Civil War. And so you won't know how to write a good hook until you've processed all your research. Then what do you remember most about? What was the most interesting thing about that ancestor? Move that to the top. And then sometimes you might have to use different tools if you're not a good writer to pull those the skills of writing a good hook, and then you can play around with it. Transcribe and process, wonder, aggregate, transcribe and process, integrate. Okay, so every time you get a new document, transcribe it. Okay, now, one of the things I teach in a book called A Recipe for Writing Family History, it talks about how to write a birth story, a marriage story, and a death story. And then there really should be how to pull it all together. The second book, how do you tie it all together? When you're writing about specific life events, transcribe your document, process it in this way to tell that life event story. And then you transcribe a document, process the things like we did with the markup, and finish that story. And then eventually you're going to have to connect those, and there's going to be connecting documents that go between the two. And so, yes, you would process a record. So you pull out a record, you transcribe it, you save the transcription, and then you add it to your story and repeat that process. I hope, Chris, that answers your question. What about titles? Do you change them up for each ancestor? Terry, I think I'll be able to talk to you later about that question here in chat after we end the live session. Tell me, I need you to define titles. Do you mean titles and subheadings within a story, or do you mean somebody's title like Doctor, Princess, Duke, and so forth? I'm not really sure. Publishing a book, I have a book, I have a video on my channel, Write Your Family History. I'm going to direct you there for that. Example of a finished story. I actually have lots of examples of finished stories, both in that book, A Recipe for Writing Family History, and then over on my my flagship website, Family History Fanatics. So that's where I would direct you. Yeah. And then thank you, Linda. She said, what I love about my process is I can have a completed story yet come back to it when I find more information. Absolutely. Absolutely. The one question I don't know if anybody asked is, how do you know if you're done? You're done when you finish processing your records. Back here on my shelf. Oh, I must have moved it. Nope. Hold on a second. So back here on my shelf, I have two books. I have this one about my grandpa, and what was great about him is I had, whoops, sorry about that. Sorry for blowing out your ears. I had a lot of personal accounts, a lot of photos, a lot of documents because he's my grandfather. He died when I was 2, but I had 2 living aunts to help me tell his story. His story is about 88 pages long in a 6x9 book. And lulu.com is where I always publish my books. But this is a proof copy. And what's great about this is you can send it out to relatives and say, hey, help me mark this up and make sure I got everything correct. And you can pick up extra stories you hadn't been concerned about. But this is my book about my German immigrant ancestor, Joseph Geisler. This book, the story portion is about 60 pages long. But the appendix is actually about half the size of the book as well. You know, he only had 4 records that documented his life. I have 1 second to wrap this up. He had 4 documents that documented his life and documents that documented the life of his wife and his children after he passed away. But I added so much historical context. I debunked the lie about where he died and how he died. And then I also added some other context there. So appendices are great. The last thing I have to share is if you could take a moment to, oh, shoot, I closed out that slide. Shoot, let me see if I can pull it up. Not that one. Okay, yeah. If you could rate this class, that would be fantastic. and let people know how I did a good job. I'm going to hop into the chat and continue texting with you guys here for a moment. Where's the feedback slide? Feedback. There we go. Share the feedback slide. So if you can use the RootsTech app and find my session and give a rating, I'd really appreciate that. But we are going to stop going live here in just a few minutes, and I will hop into the chat that RootsTech provides, but you can always find me over at familyhistoryfanatics.com website, the Family History Fanatics YouTube channel, or the Write Your Family History YouTube channel. And if you want me to go through this process for you, be sure to check the description for the RootsTech program, the description for this class. There's a form, fill out that form, and maybe I will rewrite your story for your ancestor in the future. I hope you had a great time, and we'll see you later.